In this segment, we're going to look at the theta grid adjustment rules a bit more. I'll give you a more complex example. Let's go to clauses 141. In this example, we see that there's an object complement phrase, object complement clause. If you look at the type of this clause, it's patient, and that's the semantic equivalent of object complement clause. And linguists have done a great deal of typological research with respect to object complement clauses, and they found that these clauses can be put on what's commonly called the binding continuum. Some object complements are highly propositional. For example, Mary thinks that John might have read this book. There the object complement is that John might have read this book. And that object complement begins with a complementizer. The verb in that object complement is fully inflected, and the subject of that object complement is coded as the subject of the object complement's verb. Opposed to that are object complements that are highly merged. For example, Mary made John read a book. Okay, there the object complement is John read a book. There's no complementizer. The verb is a bare stem infinitive, and the subject of that object complement is coded as the object of the matrix clause. And we can see that if we use a pronoun. Mary made him read a book. So there are three places. When we deal with object complements, there are three places to look, and that's the complementizer, how the subject of the object complement is coded, and the verb. We're here at clauses 141, which produces John wanted to read a book. Now want, sense B, is always used when the agent of the matrix clause and the agent of the patient clause are co-referential. So this is John wants himself to read a book. If it were John wants Mary to read a book, that would be a different sense of B, and we'll look at that later. You'll see that both read and want are highlighted in purple, indicating that we haven't yet dealt with their theta grid adjustment rules. And we see that there are two issues in this verse. Those two issues are these theta grid adjustment rules. Now if we right click on read and go down to edit this verb's theta grid adjustment rule, we see that read takes an obligatory agent, an obligatory patient, an optional destination, and an optional beneficiary. We can fill this out, but I want to show you something. If you don't want your theta grid adjustment rule to make any changes at all, you can check this unnecessary box. Now this theta grid adjustment rule is necessary for English. I'm just illustrating a point here. I'm going to check the unnecessary box, and now you'll see that read is no longer highlighted in purple. So we've now dealt with its rule. Let's look at the theta grid adjustment rule for want. TBTA knows that it takes an object complement, and it's supplied the agent noun phrase for us with the nominal, and it supplied the verb phrase for us because that's where we need to look for object complements. Let's click our simple output button. Now when there's an object complement, this first dialog will just show us the agent noun phrase, and we don't need to set its grammatical relation. As I mentioned in an earlier segment, this agent noun phrase will automatically be set to subject by a separate rule. We don't need to insert an adposition, so just click OK. Now when there's an object complement, this is what we see. Okay, John wants to read a book. There's no complementizer, so we can leave that blank. We don't raise the subject of this object complement out so that it becomes the object of the main verb, so we don't check that box. Subject nouns surface realization. In a situation like this, linguists call this nominal, they refer to it as big pro. Big pro is a nominal that is syntactically active but phonetically null. And if we click here, we see all of the values that we've defined for surface realization. I defined this value big pro, and I'm going to select it. Verbs target, tense, and form. Okay, John wants to read a book. So we use, in English, we use a to infinitive. So I'm going to select that. Now we see The noun surface realization is big pro, and the verb will be a to infinitive. Let's enter an example. John wants to read a book. For the grammar topic, let's select complement clause. This rule is turned off. Do you want the rule status set to on? We'll say yes. Okay. If we click the generate button now, okay, the complement clause has been positioned after the period, and the pop-up tells us it was inserted at the end by the phrase structure rule for clauses. So let's fix that problem first. If we go to our phrase structure rule for clauses, let's insert a new constituent. It will be a clause, and it must be a patient clause. For a name, let's give it object complement. Let's position this after the object phrase. Now there are issues here. Sometimes if there are obliques and an object complement, this may make it sound like the obliques are associated with the object complement rather than the main clause. We have a special technique for dealing with that particular issue. I don't want to go into that in this particular segment, so we'll click OK. If we generate the verse now, okay, John wants John read a book. If we look here, the surface realization feature has been set to big pro. So we need to write a rule that will delete the surface form for any nominal marked as big pro. And for this verb, its target tense and form is to infinitive. Let's deal with that issue first. That'll be a spell out rule for verbs, tense and form. Let's write a new rule. This will select the stem, and it will add a word. We want to add the word to. Now the word to is a preposition. When we select the option add word, all of the standard syntactic categories become available. We want to select the add position to. Okay, so this will select the stem and insert the add position. The features, we want this to be a to infinitive. We'll say add to the stem when a verb is marked as to infinitive. Okay. Now let's write a rule that will delete the surface form for any nominal marked as big pro. Let's go down to the pronoun rules. For nouns, let's enter a new group called pronouns. This will be a new translation. We want it to apply to any noun with a surface realization value of big pro. And we're going to leave this new translation text box empty. That will effectively delete the surface form. Let's call this pro, big pro. We'll assign this a topic of pronouns. Okay, so now when we generate this verse, John should be wants to read a book. So we've inserted our to preposition, and we have the stem. John, we see in the pop-up, John was deleted by pronoun and switch reference, spell out rules, nouns, pronouns, the rule for big pro. We're not going to concern ourselves with the issue of third singular present tense in this verb. So that concludes this particular segment.